Welcome to Wakey, Echoes of the Esoteric. Asenia here with co-host Jenica Haywood. And today we are diving in. We're talking consciousness. We're talking inner world and offering some insights here through the lens of the esoteric, through the lens of ancient teachings, mystery school teachings, call them what you'd like. These teachings have been around longer than any one of us, any group of people, any culture. It's quite an interesting little topic that we've had surface today during our pre-podcast conversation. So I'm excited to dive in. Super excited to dive in. So this idea of consciousness, we have, through our experience in the spiritual world, through the many different conversations, relationships, teachings, modalities, you name it, right? Just that ongoing journey in spirituality itself, I feel like have come to a place of many different, I don't want to say understandings, because if we truly understood what consciousness was, we would all be on the same page. But many different, help me out here, Jen. What would you call
schools
this?
of thought?
Yeah. Many different schools of thought, we could say many different levels of understanding what consciousness is. We could articulate that in some different ways.
Yeah,
And I feel
theoretical
like it's,
focuses.
yeah, a lot of it is, I mean, in the beginning, we know it's all theory, right? When we come into the exoteric, we're coming into a new understanding and theorizing what it would be like to achieve this, to achieve that, to reach a full embodiment of the higher self, to, like, we could just insert so many things here, right? In the exoteric, it truly is theoretical. However, when we come into this deep understanding through the esoteric lens, when we've truly come into the teachings, the work, even theory, even the theoretical understanding of what consciousness is still in keeping with the embodied understanding of another who is merely further on the path. Is still in keeping. So what we're talking about today really comes in through the confusion of tongues. That space when we come into spiritual teachings where everything is just kind of lumped together, and we're then discerning what is of the world and what isn't, what is truth, what is not. And in regard to the higher teachings, there is no delineation, not from a point of, God, words get so weird. I was going to say not from a point of a lower level of being. From a point of a lower level of being, a lower level of understanding, there is no delineation of real truth.
No,
because of identification, and that's where identification.
Yeah, I'm like, it's what you're resonating with at the time as you're making your way through the exoteric and learning the process of deciphering yourself from other, truth from non-truth, energy fields. I mean, all of the stuff that we get to play with in the exoteric. Still very messy and still very identified and based on other, like you said, somebody that's further along in the path or someone that holds a greater title. This is where like gurus come in and people where you really find your spiritual leaders that all kind of have their own renditions of consciousness and defining that, and the pretty pervasive like validation of why that's the truth. But if you search long enough, you kind of find this just these different pockets of different spiritual understandings with their own validating factors as to why it's that way. And so we kind of navigate based on our own identification and our own resonance, as we're sifting through just the abundance in the exoteric, the
Yeah.
abundance of information that's all theoretical.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we come to this place, as listeners who have been on this journey with us know by now, we kind of went through that trifold arena of spirituality, the exoteric, the mesoteric, the esoteric. So when we come into second level teachings, the mesoteric, you start to see things connect in a way that it feels to me like nothing really gets left behind, if that makes sense. There is a continued unification that happens where the things that, like you said, that we're identified with, that we're really, focused on, whether it's a modality or not, whether it's a spiritual truth, something that we've come to really know is true, through our experience, through our, whether it be our education from another teacher in spirituality, whether it be from an experience that we had that showed us something in another way that we came to understand more deeply. We find these things that through second level teachings are brought front and center and connected in a way that they could never have been connected in the exoteric. As such, the inner world. The inner world and the way the inner world truly works. And we could branch this out. We can make this a really big, huge conversation, right? Really, we're just going to talk consciousness and inner world, but let's, for just a moment here, expand the vision to the laws that run the realm that we live in. And that same set of laws, it's like all of the different scales of being, whether we're talking about the realm that we live in and our experience in this realm, or we take it down to a cell in our body and that cell's experience as a part of the greater whole of our body, or we look at, take it to a grander scale, look at Mother Earth as part of a bigger system, right? That one cell within the greater system. Those laws and the way those laws keep things working, keep the self-sustaining system functioning. We see it in the inner world and we see it everywhere else. So really my only reason for bringing up the laws and like expanding it out to, let's just take the two highest laws, the two highest fundamental laws of the cosmos are the law of 3 and the law of 7. And we see them work in all of creation. We see the way that these laws hold creation in its brilliance, right? The way that the planets rotate, the way that, I don't want to go too deep. There's so many ways we could go with this. Like immediately the moon comes up, the moon being like the farthest point from absolute. Anyone who's completely lost right now, go take the Rogue Masterclass. Like seriously, go dive into that. We'll link it in the comments. It's free. But this will give you a really beautiful rundown on, excuse me, I'm going to shut my window. This will give you a really beautiful rundown on the ray of creation. You've heard me say that now a couple of times. And the ray of creation is a hidden esoteric teaching. So you will be influenced, impressed upon by that teaching, and maybe come to a new understanding of where we are in creation. And when you receive a transmission of the ray of creation, what you're really receiving is a diagrammatic representation of the law of 3 and the law of 7 working together. This presentation, so to speak, of these laws through the ray can be applied to your life on earth. It can be applied to one cell inside your whole body. It can be applied to the mechanisms of your inner world, not even your life and the way you experience life on earth, not all the way down to the cells and the way that your cells function in your body, but that place in the in between where there are inner workings in your human machine. That's a phrase that you don't hear often enough. And once you reach second level teachings, you will likely hear more. You'll hear things like human machine, you'll hear octave, you'll hear more about the laws, you will hear so many different phrases that are now more focused on unification of the inner world. And when we talk about inner world and we talk about the way that it works and the mechanisms by which it works, man, the ray of creation is such a beautiful representation of that. And if you're familiar with the laws and that diagrammatic scale of creation, then you can look at your inner world in that same way through that same lens and be shown things that you would not understand otherwise. So again, Rogue Masterclass, head to the chat, grab it. It's free. It's gonna dump into your lap. How many hours, Jen? The classes themselves, there were 3, but then we did Q&As because so many people had questions about these teachings. You know, they do butt heads. The teachings do butt heads with the teachings of the exoteric, just the what we would call, I don't want to paint it in a light of like it's a bad thing, right? Because it's not. We're not in the realm of good versus bad anymore, just to be clear. But these teachings do butt heads with the teachings of the exoteric because there is that confusion of tongues, which is really what we're talking about today in regard to consciousness in the inner world. So just, if nothing else, this little riff that I've gone on here has laid some foundation for understanding what we're talking about and how different a conversation this truly is from a standard exoteric teaching, because we're not there in that realm. We're not discussing, you know, the dualistic frame from the perspective of still experiencing it. We're not you know, pitting one thing against the other as this is more valuable than that. Everything is as it is meant to be in the world, in the spiritual world, in the not spiritual world. It doesn't matter what you point your finger at and say that should be different. No, it shouldn't. It's exactly as it's meant to be. And also, as you pursue the path of greater awakening, and you pursue the knowledge that will guide you on that path, what you will come in contact with are second level teachings, mesoteric teachings. This is where we pick up more solidly the echoes of the esoteric. The echoes of the esoteric are more lost in the exoteric, where everything is mixed together and combined, right? Everything has been put together in one place in this world of like it feels like a little bit of a treasure hunt, because you have started the spiritual journey, you've started on the spiritual path. To reach the exoteric, you will have come into some kind of knowing around the idea that you are an energetic being, that you are more than just human, that this is more than just life. Like there is more. There is more. And how do I access it? You know, you're starting to ask questions like, once you're in the exoteric and you've reached that point of like really bringing yourself into the deeper inner work, you're going to ask questions that are different than the ones that got you there. You're going to ask questions like, if surrender is the gateway to the deepest inner work that I can conduct in myself, then how can I surrender and still manifest? You're going to be asking questions like that. If I'm surrendering to God's will, why am I still manifesting? How does this reconcile?
Yeah, you find a lot of those areas that just don't make sense. You've done so much of the searching in the exoteric, similar to what we went over last, in our last episode, and you're finding things that are like, well, I hear about threes all the time. There's the Trinity and triangles, and that's got to do with, this branch of yeah, I don't know, not Christianity, but what's the
Even so,
paganism.
even
Like, yeah,
yeah,
whatever. There's all these different, you're starting to be like, well, okay, the similarity is there's a trinity, there's three, but they're all in these different places and they're all kind of meaning different things and none of them are coming back together. Or like, yeah, if this is the case, then how does this make sense too? Because both of them are, they're important and I can see that, but how do they go together? There's so many other layers of like, hold up, how can we have this and this and this that are all coming up with, all creating positive things or creating desirable stuff, but like it doesn't come back to me in any sort of tangible form. It's really interesting. As you've been talking, I was like thinking again, similar to last episode, just how important it is that like your preconceived notions are always put in check, especially if you're going to jump into the Rogue Masterclass and take advantage of just an
yeah,
abundance of information and a transmission that's going to knock your socks off. Like your preconceived notions will prevent that from happening, largely just because there's already so much confusion and there's already been um an effort to make these things make sense, an effort to reconcile them, but there's still so much lacking that it's like there's almost nothing to do with it unless you've got a heavy defined line that then turns into a block for more knowledge if you hang on to it too tightly. So I mean, I yeah,
yeah.
love to throw that in there. And I love the comment too that in our the Asia popped in here with like where we are in the universe. Like that can mean so many things. There's so many different um, you know, thoughts, spiritual leaders in this thought of what that means, where we are, how God relates to us, how we relate to God, what, this so many of these not the echoes, like you said, echoes of these esoteric truths. By the time they make it to the exoteric, it is
It's water.
it's a mix of tongues. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, there it's all a different language. And trying to make them make sense is when you start finding those points where you just can't, like it's not making sense, this is where you drop into those bigger questions and
Yeah.
start, leading yourself towards the doorway to the mesoteric that then brings in what is the clarification, what is lacking, where we actually are, what consciousness actually is, what this human machine is, a whole new layer and level of being able to observe everything. These laws that
Yeah.
are all that are, exist from top to bottom through the entire array.
Yeah. That's really powerful when you bring it up in that way. And it pinged me, something that you just said pinged me to one of the posts that I put up in the group this week. Join the Akashic Kitchen. You can find that link in the chat as well. Lots of what I would call like tangents on these conversations that we're having that really bring through poignant points, just through some posting that happens in the group, and graphics and metaphors, and there's all kinds of things happening in there. So hop into that space. But one of the things that I posted this past week had to do with consciousness and authenticity. And I made the very bold statement, which I stand behind even now, and will always through these teachings, because there's no way to unknow it, right? This statement that consciousness and authenticity are mutually exclusive. You cannot be authentic. You cannot be in your fullest embodiment of your unique authenticity and not be conscious. Just like you can't be conscious and not step into that full embodiment of your unique authenticity, who you are, how you're meant to express and show up in the world and engage with life, engage with others, engage with yourself, like walk the journey of being human and being here. You cannot have one without the other. And why is that? Why? How do you become conscious? The answer to that is the same as the question, how do you become authentic? That's why. Because what we're talking about when we're talking consciousness and the inner world and uniting the inner world is the journey, is the path and the practice of bringing the inner world and the outer world into full alignment. We've talked about this before, but this is what it is. This is what consciousness is. You are no longer representing yourself differently than you feel about yourself on the inside. You are no longer showing up as a person who is different than the one within. And that is authenticity. That is being authentic.
I like to think of authenticity as self-knowledge. You know, if I'm going to be authentic to me, I would then know me intimately. And consciousness is the same thing. To expand consciousness is to expand self-knowledge. And by, you know, the byproduct of that is then knowledge of things greater than and less than you because of the law of three and scale. It's all completely enmeshed. It's just we mistake authenticity with an entire list of labels that we've then taken on that then create this, you know, experience of a person that's existing within many, many rules that we've then put upon ourselves within those labels. Well, if I'm this way, then I've got to show up this way. It doesn't allow for the natural movement and flow of life in and within and through you. It's extremely rigid in how you need to show up for others to then perceive you. And I feel like that's one of the main, a very clear indicator, a very clear way to observe yourself and even others in, you know, how we do show up and what labels are actually, you know, are we prevailing upon ourselves to then need to fit within on a day that maybe a day it doesn't fit as well as it did the other day. That's all pervasive in the exoteric as well. It's we're all trying to find our way and find ourselves, and that's required on one level, you know, stepping out and being willing to be who you are and stand as your own person. And then you start thinking, well, what is this? Who am I? What is this person that I am? And it seems like the closer I look, every day brings a different version of that. Every hour sometimes. I don't understand.
It's funny, the idea of, and I'm not sure where this came from. I'm checking the chat because I see some comments. I'm not sure where this idea come from, but I've heard it multiple times, or where this idea came from. Have you ever heard someone say, like, if I could just learn to be more authentic, people would like me. People would like me more. Oh, yeah. Oh, because that's not what that means. That's not what that means at all. And that truly comes with a walk in the work. The dismantling of duality, the dismantling of that good versus bad, people like me, people don't, they're being concerned with the external world, being concerned with what people think of you, all of that external considering that happens. It's quite the opposite of becoming authentic.
Yeah,
Truly.
it actually takes you further away from it. The more you're trying to appease the outside world, you lose yourself so fast.
But think about the flip side of that too. We could take it to the other end of the spectrum. And then there's also, I've heard this multiple times, well, I don't care what anybody thinks. I'm just going to be myself. But you don't know who you are yet. So how can you do that? How can
And
you
you're
say, I
still in
don't care what anybody
resistance
thinks?
to the
Right.
outside world. You're
Yes.
still looking at the outside world.
Yes. Yes. And that self-knowledge that you, because you know, the self-knowledge that brings to that is knowledge that cannot end in dualism.
So repeat that again.
It's
You
got
were
no
cutting out
footing.
a little bit.
The knowledge that brings you, that guides your journey to authenticity, is knowledge that cannot stand in dualism.
Which inevitably expands consciousness. It inevitably
Right.
grows consciousness. The search for yourself is a search into greater consciousness. This is where, again, the comment from Asia really pops in. The quote, "Know thyself," seems beyond our grasp because of this misunderstanding, because of the multitude of misdirections and definitions and all of the stuff that seems to just keep us spinning around this question.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just directly correlated. Like, know thyself is not just, it's a call to action. It's a
It's not
call
know what you
to,
think of yourself. It's not
yes,
saying know what you think of yourself.
yeah,
It goes so
or
much
know what
deeper.
others think of you.
Yeah, those are still surface knowings. We haven't gone deep at all yet. To know what you think of yourself on the surface, to know what other people think of you on the surface, you still haven't gone way deep down inside yourself to get to know that inner machine and how it works and what is actually present inside.
And which which aspect of you is showing up in any given situation with a whole other list of I know how to be and show up because this is what I think of myself now, that then also changes depending on the circumstance, time of day, what cycle, part of your cycle you're in. That's oh my gosh, I want to dive into that. We should do that for next week.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like fun. So
Yeah.
that would be a great little offshoot of this conversation today, because there are so many aspects. I kind of wanted to spit it out just for people who are like, man, you guys are dancing around this topic of what consciousness is and what the inner world really looks like. So let's just break it down really simply for anybody who's been watching this unfold and is curious for more, or maybe if you just need a bomb today because this is the first one you've listened to. So your inner world is constructed of multiple centers of consciousness. We have all kinds of minds in the inner world, many, many minds. Now, the department heads are the intellectual or the mental body, and then also the emotional body, the astral body, as well as the physical, which is like I was going to come up with something cheeky to say. I don't have anything. So, the physical body really being that umbrella that oversees your instinct, your instinctual mind, as well as your moving mind, the way that your body moves, the way that you walk, the way that you talk, your senses, the sensual body, the way that you sense your external environment. So that would be a rundown, just a really brief, quick rundown on the centers of consciousness that are in what we would call the lower story in mesoteric teachings, in advanced spiritual teachings. We would call that the lower story. And this lower story is what we're unifying in this work. We are no longer seeing ourselves from all of these multiple different perspectives, the way that anyone could really see anything from multiple different perspectives. Let's take the mountain, for example. There's a mountain and you've got three different people standing in front of the mountain, and each of these three people are very dominant in one or the other of the centers of the lower story. So they're either dominant in the intellectual center, or they're dominant in the emotional center, or they're dominant in the physical center, right? You got all these three people lined up. They're having a conversation about the mountain. this mountain, this beautiful mountain that's right in front of them, big, enormous mountain. And the way that they're each talking about the mountain, they can't seem to get on the same page. They can't seem to really understand each other, because the one is looking at the mountain from a physical aspect, from a physical perspective, and sees, when they look at the mountain, the path of ascent, the way that they would climb it, where it might be really difficult because, ooh, look at all of that really loose rock, right? Whatever it is. Versus the other that's looking at the mountain from a very emotional perspective, and they're looking at the beauty of it and thinking about the way that the life cycles on this mountain turn around each other, and the way that the different species of animals in the food chain of life are keeping each other alive, just the magic and the beauty. They're very emotionally connected to the way that this mountain presents the different kinds of life that are on it, the beauty of it, the way the light falls behind it, and the sun rays split, and it's just beautiful. Or that intellectual person would look at the mountain, and they would tune in to all of the different classes of rock, all of the different, maybe they're looking at the species of animal, but not in the very emotional way that this other person would be looking at it. They're looking at the species of animal in regard to, who's been around the longest. What are the animals that are the newer animals to Earth? What are the animals that have been here the longest? How deep does the rock go? What different layers can we find in this mountain? Very cerebral, very intellectual. Quite different conversations being had by all three people, but they're all talking about the same thing. They're all talking about the same mountain, just looking at it through a different lens with a different perspective, because they are dominant in one or the other of those lower stories. Now, what about a person who has unified their lower story, who has brought all of those centers of consciousness together? This produces a different outcome, much different outcome, because you're going to see all of it. And you're going to see beyond simply the physical, emotional, and intellectual aspects to come into a higher knowing or a higher understanding of what it is you stand before, the mountain that you stand before, your place on the earth in regard to this mountain, what knowledge might be held by this mountain. What can it show you? What is it presenting to you in a much higher form? So this is how, truly, how those of us on Earth, human beings on Earth, who hold perspectives on the same thing, can argue with each other at cross purposes and never come to an agreement. And every single person be right all at the same time. Right. I'll put that in quotes. Right.
Well, I was going to mention that just, being dominant, having the dominance being in one of those centers automatically puts a level of like value in that center too. You're immediately valuing, the intellectual breakdown of what the mountain is made of. That's like
Right.
incredible. It's the most important thing, because without that there would be no mountain. And the emotional is like, but the majestic beauty and what it offers, and these animals, and the cycles, and that automatically is going to have the highest priority. Why even climb the mountain if you're not going to feel it and be there with all of these magnificent things? And then you've got, the physical center that's like, well, you can't do anything with the mountain if you can't even pick out a path and like know how you're going to make your way up there or how you want to navigate it. And so like just to add on everything that you said, even something that doesn't like, that we don't get like passionate about, that doesn't hit these other layers of like, you know, personal beliefs or insecurities or past experiences, like even something as simplistic as a mountain, because of that different set of values that land differently, you can and will end up arguing about what the best way to look at the mountain or go about engaging with it is. and it's all it's always all, but there's no way to see that when you're constantly, you know, when this importance, you're trying to get someone else to see the importance and to view it through your own eyes, and these eyes are still in the one center that then have other eyes too that are all, you know, again, we're not even getting into impressions and life experiences and, you know, beliefs and all of that that then play in as well. But I think that that's really intriguing, is your value set is different depending on the dominant center.
Mm-hmm. The way you see it, the way you perceive it. What
Mhm.
needs to be the first piece of conversation?
What needs to
The
be
point to be
focused
made that's
upon.
most important. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So you'll argue and never ever come to an agreement on the exact same thing. Think about those implications just for a sec.
I know. I was just thinking like humanity at large, and here we are. And it's
Oh,
beautiful, truly, just this, to have the knowing, to have the understanding and awareness that this is how it's meant to be, because this is what we're here to do. We are self-developing organisms, and to be on a path of higher consciousness means to face these kinds of things,
yeah,
to
we are
come
not
front and
fully
center.
developed. Hmm.
No, we're the only beings on the planet that aren't fully developed. Dog is fully dog, cat is fully cat, bird is fully bird, human is not fully human, not yet, not fully developed. We have not achieved our highest level of consciousness. Every other being on the planet has. A bird cannot be any more conscious than it is. A dog cannot be any more conscious than it is. We can. And to contend with that aspect of the inner world, to then begin to study the inner world in a new way, and to be very clear, I'm not sure we've said this yet, perhaps in the very first podcast we did. These teachings of the Esoteric, when you come into second level spiritual teachings, you are now on an objective path, which does not mean, here, try this. This worked for me too. This is the world of modalities that we wade our way through to find second level teachings, to continue asking questions that can't be answered by all of those modalities and all of that work that we've done. We reach a point where we come into an objective path. This is objective. These teachings are objective. They work the same way for everyone. You will have your own subjective experience with them, but the path is the same for everyone. The steps are the same for everyone. And it is not a teaching where you are becoming authentic like me. Mm-mm. You're becoming authentic like you. What does it mean to be your most authentic self? That's going to look completely different than it does for me, because we are not the same human. We have a different set of experiences. We have taken in different impressions. We have different inner worlds to contend with, a different fallout, if you will, of the teachings. And what it really means is that you are becoming your most authentic self. Okay, so as I say this, I gotta just throw this out there. I'm gonna refer to Jesus, okay? Because there is this misconception that Jesus came to earth for followers. I stood at the pulpit and I preached this to my congregation, and I watched a couple of head spin of like, wait a minute, what did she say? Jesus did not come here to create followers, to create a following. That is not why Jesus came to earth. Okay. Jesus was not saying, be like me. This was not a be like me situation. Learn these ways, learn to be like me, learn to embody your highest consciousness just like I do. No. Do as I do. Be in the way that I am being. But for you, what is most authentic for you? What is your truth? How can you learn to be your most authentic self if you are following a subjective process that someone else has handed you? You can't. You're going to have a subjective experience that brings you more into identification with something.
Well, and how how many people, you know, have embarked on the path of following in Jesus's footsteps and trying to imitate or replicate what he did, and have found themselves in even more confusion.
Oh yeah.
Like,
I just
that's
saw the
been
comment
me.
in the chat. Do you see the comment in the chat that said, so what would Jesus do isn't objective? How would Jesus behave in his fully embodied authenticity? Might look different than how I would behave in my fully embodied authenticity. Right. Because essence still has natural likes and dislikes.
And personality still.
Yeah. Yes. And there is a true personality that surfaces with essence, even
that is authentic
before essence. Yes. You're really on that path, on that journey of parsing out the inner world through the very objective work of the Esoteric, and coming to a deeper understanding of what is not true in you. Now, largely, this is nuts to even just say this, but largely the way that Jesus would respond to a situation in highest consciousness would likely very much be the same as someone else who would respond to a situation in highest consciousness. There may be nuanced differences, but largely it would be the same. But to think, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus do in this situation? When you don't, I'm just going to say it, you don't really know who Jesus was. You don't really understand why he behaved the way that he did, why he led the way that he did, how and why he taught the way that he did. Because you're still looking at the external world through a lens of your own personality, false personality at that, identifications, associations with all different things that you think are you. Have you ever heard somebody say, oh no, I can't do that, I'm spiritual? Literally, you just identified with spirituality. And I have to laugh a little and give like the weird face, because seriously, let's keep this as simple as possible. Oh, I would never, I'm spiritual. You're identified with your spirituality now.
And dualism, and stuck in dualism. Jesus
equals
right. Good, spirituality
equals
good, that equals bad. Jesus never, there was nothing of dualistic impressions or like influences at all in anything that was exemplified through him. There's no possible way to understand anything that came from him in any sense of the word if you're still looking at him as though that's good, desirable, is, you know, to beat the bad. Like, it's just, yeah, the dualistic framework just doesn't allow for reception of that that kind.
Yeah, I love that comment. This is why we're still so confused about some of the things that he did,
and why his miracles are a mystery to us.
Yeah, why miracles
I'm just
are
starting
to
tease apart mysteries, yeah, or miracles.
Miracles are truly, I'll help you tease it apart. Miracles are truly an occurrence in keeping with the laws of this and other realms. It has to have been possible here by law for it to happen. And often the things that we see as horrible, right? This is where we call in a miracle. We need a miracle. Pray, please pray. We need a miracle because this horrible thing is happening. And we forget about the laws that govern this realm. Most people just don't even know. They don't have that awareness. If a miracle, so to speak, happened, it is through and only through the influence of higher realms. It is possible by law here through influence of higher realms.
Mm-hmm.
And what are higher realms but realms, worlds with less laws?
Then freeing up the ability to actually have something occur that couldn't here because of more laws.
Right. And it would still have to be possible here, even under those many laws, for it to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And this is often the question that I get. Well, why does God answer her prayers and not mine? Why did she get a miracle and I didn't? Again, laws. Laws. And this isn't about God favoring one person over the other. This is about law. Truly. It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down. I feel like we could do an entire need to make a
Yeah,
note,
because
please.
I
We'll
mean,
need to make an entire podcast out of, I mean, we could do a podcast on miracles, a whole
uh-huh.
podcast on miracles. We could do a whole podcast on law, the way that laws play in, and even just let's use that analogy of playing poker with Jesus. You know, you have people asking for things that are not possible by law. This is often why people go, well, my prayers aren't being answered. You're asking for things that aren't possible here, or you are preventing them through your own perception of what is and isn't possible. Yes, you can appeal to the higher laws, but that requires consciousness. That requires pulling yourself out from under the many laws you're currently operating under. And consciousness is the only way to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I've
That,
known I've known that like definition, of theoretically of the laws and how miracles would occur. Um,
mhm.
but then we're, relating it to Jesus and like the how and the why and for what purpose and what did it actually mean and was it literal and was the literal side, jumping into the higher esoteric truth and that's where it's like, yeah, there's so many layers into what is seen and perceived and that secondary higher truth behind it that is hidden that requires a unified vision,
Yeah.
a unified understanding to then piece apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you even
All right. You,
appeal to those higher laws?
yes. Yes, but only through the inner world.
What does it mean to appeal to the higher laws, though? They are laws regardless of, they don't favor one or another.
No, it would be the act of bringing yourself out from under the lower laws.
Mm,
Would be appealing to the higher laws in my line of thinking, in the way I would say. Yeah, we could do a whole show on prayer as well. I saw that comment pop up in the chat about praying
yes.
for something different.
Or
The
in a
act of
better
prayer
way.
and could be a whole conversation, because it really is about the request and the perspective from which you speak. Truly. It's not meant to be a
Yeah.
petition. Yeah. Yeah.
We really should dive into that one. I'm like,
Yeah.
mm.
Yeah.
If it's piquing your
Yeah. We'll get
interest
there.
too,
We'll
drop
get
it in the chat, comment on YouTube,
Yeah.
whatever it is, like
Yeah.
let
And
us
if you're
know.
interested in more of the conversation on Jesus and his teachings, and you're interested in truly learning, I know this is just the perfect segue here. If you're interested in truly learning the higher value of parabolic wisdom, parabolic symbology, every esoteric teaching has a higher value, a higher psychological value that must be understood to truly receive the teaching, not the literal meaning that we often receive. And if this piques your interest, if you are interested in the higher psychological value of Jesus' teachings, join us in Cypher starting March 20th, because we are doing a full 8-week study of the parables and the higher psychological value of these teachings through esoteric wisdom. It's going to be quite a ride. So we'll drop a comment for that in the chat as well.
Yeah, and
I had
you will
something
get
else
an
I was going to bring
extra,
up.
you'll get a bonus 4 weeks for that too. So it'll be 8 weeks of
Oh
study
yeah,
together, but 4 weeks of your own preliminary study to help
yeah,
help you see and understand the lens of the esoteric. Everything that we're talking about on this podcast, everything that we're revisiting through a different perspective. It'll be 4 weeks of your self-study, of training yourself to see through the lens of the esoteric, through the lens of not dualism, but being able to see the higher echelon view through the neutral
yeah,
force.
yeah,
So it's more like 12 weeks. Oh, please. Yes.
yeah.
I'm so excited.
Join us. And you don't have to take 4. We did it in 4. The first run of Cypher. We did it in 4 weeks. We built out the lens in 4 weeks time, each week, diving into different aspects of the esoteric teaching and lots of diagrams. I mean, you have all of the content captured, a beautiful transmission from that first run that will help you build out that lens. It took us 4 hours. It could be done in a week's time. You can sit with it, you can take it in, come back, do another one. You could do it, you could binge it in a day if you really wanted to, blow your own mind, go right ahead. Because it's powerful. It's a whole different perspective on really what we did is we broke down this difference between esoteric science and objective science. So objective science being the mainstream science that we learn, and how different that is from esoteric science or esoteric psychology. They're sort of one and the same. But that process, that 4 week process that we took, you could easily do that in a week for sure. You could do it in a couple of days if you really wanted to. And that will prep you, like Jen said, that will prep you for coming into the 8 weeks of study so that you have that lens built out. It's really like, I explain this in the course itself, but just the analogy of like inviting you over to my house to go stargazing, and like I have a new telescope and you show up and I'm just like, here you go, use it. Right? How would that work if you've never used a massive telescope with all of the buttons and the lenses, and like you don't know what to do with it? Like, well, Saturn is really big in the sky right now. Just look. Like you can't just put your face to this telescope without understanding the settings and how to use it. And so that's what we're doing in those first 4 weeks, is really laying the groundwork of why esoteric science and how esoteric science is so different from objective science, so that by the time we get to our 8 weeks together and we're walking through the parables and we're talking about this higher valuation, this psychological value of the parables and their teachings, you are familiar with the lens, right? You can now take a picture, you can take a snapshot on your own, you know how to work the buttons, you know how to use the lenses and where to point it and how to get it to focus, and you understand what that process looks like now. You're not just thrown to figure it out, because that's the opposite of what we're doing here. We're guiding you through the process in a way that makes it very understandable and opens up a whole new world of truly a whole new world of perspective for you with which to look at teachings like the parables that Jesus taught through an entirely different lens, and see things, learn things, come to know things through those teachings that you would otherwise have not had the tools to perceive.
It's incredible.
Truly.
It really is. And it's at a mind-blowing price point. So jump on
Yeah.
board while it's
Yeah.
still
You
like
get
that.
the library too. You have access to the library. We jumped into the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the law scriptures of Nag Hammadi on the first run of Cypher. So you also have access to that. The price is going up. So get in now if you want to be able to access these teachings and have the full library available to you. Everyone who gets in stays in.
Yeah.
Cypher is just built in place, which makes it also very cool. You come into Cypher, you're now in Cypher for life. We're going to be studying more and more esoteric literature, and broadening our scope.
It's a riot. Oh my gosh, it's so fun.
Whole new conversation, whole new, whole new perspective and conversation. This feels like a really good place to draw today to a close. This has been quite a chat. I'm gonna have to come back and listen to this because, or at a minimum, get your notes from you, so that we can move forward with some new ideas. We've laid some groundwork here that we're gonna need to expand on in future episodes, and I'm super looking forward to that. Super looking forward. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to everyone in the chat for participating, for being here with us, posing questions, giving feedback, your takeaways. Powerful stuff. Absolutely powerful stuff. Thank you so much. Join us inside the Akashic Kitchen for continued teachings, for upcoming events and programs. Meet us in Mexico for the solstice in June. We're going to be doing some really potent in-person therapy, consciousness work. Yeah, I'm super stoked about everything that's coming. Looking forward to seeing all of you there. Hit the chat with your questions, with your takeaways, and we will see you next week.
See you then.